weird having me standing up here not saying anything, but it's not as weird as standing here and looking in that mirror and only seeing yourself. Thanks, Kat. So, nice to see you again, by the way. Right, let me just start off then by saying something about me and who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. So, my name's Jacob Naish, and my career is very similar to yours. For the last 20 years, I've been working in sport and social responsibility programs. I've been working for football clubs, NGOs, and also I've had this kind of parallel career where I became an academic. I did a PhD in football for corporate social responsibility, and I began writing and publishing and thinking too much about the world that we all work in. A lot of that came down to this idea of purpose, and when I think about purpose, the things that I can't get away from are the things that we learn in the social sciences when we go and become academics about the wider societal changes, the things that are happening in society that even if we think we're in our own little world in football and in an even smaller world in football for corporate social responsibility, in fact, we're massively impacted by those changes. And the reason why I'm here to talk to you about those changes is because I want to try to enlist all of you. I want to recruit you. And I want to recruit you in a mission to build the future of the game, to build a different type of football. That may sound big. That may sound huge, in fact. But there's ways that we can do that and questions that we can ask that chunk it down into really small, manageable chunks. So that's what we're going to do today and some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. This is going well. This is definitely filling me with confidence about post-pandemic presentations. I can tell you, I can't wait to do the next one. Okay, so, yeah, the way I want to talk through this, can we go up a little bit more, guys? Just a few more inches? Okay, great. So, that's great. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so the way we're going to chunk this down is, first of all, we're going to talk about purpose. And purpose is really important because purpose is a little bit different to corporate social responsibility work. Corporate social responsibility work can still be purposeful. It is purposeful. It's really important. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But then I'm going to show you how this is being driven and the drive to purpose and a purposeful football that might be coming, whether we like it or not, is being driven by two changes in society, in young people and technology. And then I'm going to take those changes and I'm going to put them into a couple of questions that may be your actions that you can take back with you to your clubs, to your institutions, to your federations, and questions you can ask yourself as well. So, I've told you a little bit about me now, but maybe something else to tell you is that I've been really fortunate because I've been doing a lot of the work that you guys are doing now. I've absolutely loved it. I think that it has made a massive change in the world. But now I'm in this other place, and I'm working at a place called Right to Dream. Has anybody here heard of Right to Dream? I saw two. Yeah, great. All right, man, that's amazing. 3 people did. That's amazing. Okay, so Right to Dream is what we call an opportunity ecosystem. And an opportunity ecosystem, by that we mean it's a collection of clubs, football clubs and academies, in which we have a slightly different model for talent development. What we do in that model is we teach young talented athletes around character education and also on their academics as well as their football. And this has led to us, because we invest so much in our academy structure itself, this has led to us being the youngest team in Europe and one of the youngest teams in the world. It's also led us to, we have a model in which we very rarely exit young people from our academy model. We usually retain them, and they're very rarely exited on football grounds. And if they are exited on football grounds, it's to something else. And this has led to us having about 80% of our young people getting a very high quality in our outcome in our academy system. And if you compare that with England, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, quite a lot of my examples come from England. Of course, the example there is less than 1% of the young people that are in the academy system get a high quality outcome. And think about that in terms of social responsibility for a minute. So about 80% of our young people get really high quality outcomes. And to also give you, to maybe like shift perceptions of what young footballers can be, to give you an example of the young people that we have at our academy in Ghana, our under-15s in 2019, they entered into a national robotics competition. They didn't expect to do very well, but they ended up winning. The prize from that national robotics competition was to go to the under-15 Robotics World Cup in Detroit, Michigan. So off they did. They went. 160 different teams there in Detroit, Michigan, Robotics World Cup. They came 8th. Now, I think this one thing alone can really challenge our preconceptions of what young, talented athletes can be and what behaving in a socially responsible, purposeful way can mean and be for them. Because underneath this whole 3-pillared model that we have of football, character, and education, underneath all of that is purpose. We're going to learn a little bit about what purpose is, but the way we work with purpose is we're trying to turn the discovery of purpose, and when I say that, I mean discovery inside yourself. We're trying to turn that into something more than luck, more than fluke, so that somebody like Marcus Rashford, you can actually increase your chances of discovering somebody like that. A couple more centimetres, guys. What I've been doing for the last 6 months is I've been really lucky. I've got to think, talk, and write with a couple of my colleagues about nothing other than this subject. And I've done it by looking only at our organisation. We've only looked at ourselves. And what we've done is we've gone deep into our model and we've asked ourselves some really difficult questions about what we do well and what we don't do well. We've asked ourselves these questions in part because we've recently got a lot of media attention. That media attention has been about how socially minded we are as a club, and some people have given us this name that we're not sure we really deserve, which is the home of purpose-driven athletes. What we've discovered in that research is that there are deep inconsistencies in the way that we do our work. There are things that we have to do much, much better. The way that we do our purpose work is not evenly applied across our organisation, and we need to change that. And now, over the course of the next 5 years, by turning that lens in on ourselves and now learning what we have to do better, over the next 5 years, we're going to invest, change, and try to answer those questions. We'll come to why this is important later. About a year ago, I got to talk to you guys. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. And what we talked about there was we talked about purpose, fans, athletes, and brands. And what I explained there is how what we're witnessing in the social sciences is a big shift in fans' perception of the word purpose and what fans' expectations are. I also then put that together with consumption habits of fans, how fans are changing the way they watch the game and what they expect that game to be when they watch it. And some of you who maybe were at that talk may have noticed that just a few months after we talked about that research was used in a very famous, or some would say infamous, example just a few months later. Maybe some of you know what it is. We're going to look at it, so don't worry. But the important thing I want to do with this talk is I want to lift from this, and I want to go beyond brands and fans, and I want to start talking about purpose more generally, what it is, what it's not, and why it's going to be very important for all of us, all of you guys who are doing this amazing, brilliant community work out there with all of your organisations. And go up a little bit, guys. So, like in true academic fashion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explain what something is, purpose, by explaining what it's not. It's infuriating when we do this, but this is what we do. And what purpose is not, or rather what it is quite different from, is corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility, the issue with it can often be is not the quality of the work. Corporate social responsibility is very high quality, very impactful, very important work. It's work that has changed the world. The work that you guys all do, the work that we have been doing over the last 20 years has made the world a better place. That is beyond question. It's important. We need to continue doing it. But the problem with corporate social responsibility is generally how it gets used and often how it gets ignored. And to give you an example of this, I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to go back to the beginning of corporate social responsibility. In 1995, in the Niger Delta, there was an activist called Ken Saro-Wiwa. That's him on the screen here. And Ken Saro-Wiwa was an environmental activist who was very upset at how the oil companies were changing and destroying the ecology of the Niger Delta. In 1995, he was arrested. And he was arrested, we came to know, because of certain arrangements that the Royal Dutch Shell Company made with local police officers. And unfortunately, he was killed in custody. Now, when this became known and understood, Royal Dutch Shell Company quickly acknowledged and realized that they had been responsible for that death. And they did some things that were quite interesting. The first thing that they did is they began recruiting the activists, campaigners, and community workers that had been working around this issue and getting them into the company, paying them high salaries. The second thing they did is they began writing corporate codes of practice and conduct, and they began publishing these and using PR companies to talk about them more widely. And the last thing they did is they began investing in corporate social responsibility work, community work, in the areas in which they did their operations. Now, to some of you, this will sound familiar. I talk widely and often over 7 years of research for my PhD about football and corporate social responsibility, and I know that this is a familiar story in the game itself. And what's also probably true is it's still a story now. We have deep issues still within our game. Deep issues. And yet most of our corporate social responsibility work, not because of any fault of anybody in this room, but it's directed outwards at the community. And so, for example, right now, we have deep mental health problems with the English Academy system. There's actually a seed of mental health crisis within our game. And yet, there is this high quality, brilliant, amazing health well-being work being done by our community teams out in the communities. Not in every example. There are some examples of it being turned inwards as well. And what is really crazy about this is that the resources are there to actually change this situation. That is beyond question. On the screen right now is the amount of Premier League revenue that actually gets spent on corporate social responsibility. It's less than 0.01%. If we go to Nike, it's 10% of this. It's less than 0.001%. Amount of global revenues are spent on corporate social responsibility. What this tells us is the revenues are actually there to do something about this. The possibility is. It's the will that's different. The purpose is slightly different in this regard, because doing truly purposeful work, and like I said, I'll just repeat this because I really don't want anybody to think that I'm critiquing the work that we do, because I'm not. I really believe in it, and of course I've been doing it myself. Purpose is slightly different. Being purposeful is inverting that lens and turning it in on us as organisations, and more specifically our clubs. Looking inside our clubs and asking, what do we need to do to ourselves to be better? What do we need to do to our own organisations to be better citizens in the world? It's answering this call to action from Leo Tolstoy, that everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves. You give me 1 second, I just want to take some water, actually. Sorry, guys. I bet you're all thirsty now, right? For fuck's sake. You don't have to play music every time, Jesus Christ. Oh God. Okay. So, where were we? Yeah. So, purpose. As we can see, purpose is a little bit different. And the resources are there to do something. Change from broadly what our corporate social responsibility activities, very, very important work, and flip that a little bit into that, turning that lens around and looking in on ourselves. There are clubs out there doing this right now. There's no doubt about it. There are clubs acknowledging that they're not sustainable enough, and they're changing business practice to achieve net zero, for example. There are clubs committing to a totally different model for youth development. There are clubs that are handing over ownership to fans. There is a club, I can even think of one club, that has set core values and principles, and when a founder didn't live up to those values, they actually managed to get that person removed. So like, there's no doubt, and there's some clubs in which all of these things are happening at the same time. We've also seen that the pandemic has actually helped some clubs rediscover their original purposes, and we've seen stadiums converted into testing facilities and food banks. So like, there's no doubt in my mind that there is good news, but the issue is that there's a struggle there. There's still a struggle. And the way that we know that there's a struggle is because there's no way that the European Super League can even be suggested unless there wasn't. And the good news, that if we do this, all of the work that we do, if we build the kind of football by focusing on ourselves that we want to build, the good news is that all of our CSR work just gets better. All of our CSR work unlocks even more investment and more potential to do good, which is all the great work that you guys are doing. So just to recap, purpose is about going on that journey of self-discovery. It's about asking questions, it's about looking inside, and it's doing that on an individual and organizational level because you're searching for the best version that you can be. Now, right now, that all sounds a bit ethereal, a bit abstract, a bit wishy-washy. So you'd be totally within your rights to not take my word for it. If so, when this is done, have a little Google around and type in the word purpose and tech companies and see what you discover. And what you discover is the biggest tech companies in the world right now are doing exactly this type of work, exactly these type of questions, but they're just chucking a lot more money and they're at it and they're working a lot faster. So the next way I want to kind of convey some of this to you is by looking at the drivers, the core drivers that are shaping this and pushing it forward in society. And I'm going to look at two of those, young people and technology. And what I always really love to do is I like to try to remind myself that, because social scientists do this, right? We can forget, we can get locked into a particular hole, but I like to try to remind myself that society changes in very fast, very rapid and very surprising ways. And this is something that I always come back to when I want to remind myself of this. About 15 years ago, there was a study done into texts, letters, radio programs, and newspapers. It was a linguistic analysis, and it tried to understand how happy people were at various different points in time. And what they discovered is that during the Second World War in the France and UK, places massively affected by that conflict, people were actually probably happier than they were in the UK in the 1980s with all of that stuff, right? All of that progress. And the reason posited for this is meaning. There was a reason to be. There was a rationale. There was a reason to exist. There was a why. Their lives had purpose, and they could all come together around that purpose. I think there's a question there as well about what effect the pandemic might have had and why it might be a really good time for us to think about that now. And football is not immune from understanding this. I think very powerful people in football, they get it. They get that society changes and that the world is different and that they have to tap into this. But what we saw, unfortunately, in the example that I was talking about earlier in the European Super League is the very same research that I talked about with you a year ago. That research was used to justify the doomed European Super League project. It was used to justify the reason why they needed to break away. And what they did is they took that research, which was mainly done by Copper90, which is a media agency in London, but then there was also some done by the Sports Innovation Lab, and they paired it together with a piece of research done by the ECA. And what they did is they took all the stuff in those reports that was all the sexy stuff, all about games and having like shorter games and just highlights only and multimedia experiences with multiple screens and maybe changing the rules of the sport, putting it on at different times, ways that they could actually attract young people back into the game. That's the sexy stuff that they took and they talked about. But in those exact same reports, there was also a whole bunch of other stuff. In fact, I would say much more important stuff. And that was all about the values that young people wanted to see in the game. The values that they felt were not currently, there were not things that they could align with in the football that they saw now. Now, of course, if the European Super League guys had put that in there, then they would have undermined their whole project. So they ignored it. They cut it all out and just used the first part of the research. And of course, what ended up happening is the very purpose-driven people that they didn't want to see, that they wanted to ignore and pretend that they weren't there, they rose up and they kind of undermined and they destroyed that project for them. So this is like a very big lesson in why you shouldn't cherry pick research and just take the bits that you want out of a report. But also it's a really good reminder, I think, of the moment that we're in now and just how much values and principles are going to feature for young people moving forward. And there's other examples of this. We can see it across the world right now. Hands up if you've heard of the Great Resignation. No one? I saw 2. Okay, 3. Great. So the Great Resignation is a phenomenon that happened in August of this year. And what happened is 4 million more Americans than expected quit their jobs and didn't go to another one in August. And as that phenomenon has grown in awareness, as people have learned about it, more and more and more people have joined. When social scientists are looking at employee surveys and trying to understand why this is, what they're learning is that the reason is because of meaning and autonomy. Or another way of saying that is people feel their work lacks meaning and people feel that they are not autonomous enough in it. Another way of saying that is there's a deficit of purpose in their work. And this is a real real societal force that is causing people to talk with their feet. They're literally walking. And when we look at the statistics around what millennials and Generation Z are really concerned about, what we're seeing is they have massive existential concerns about the world in which they're going into. They're really, really worried. They're looking at things like, of course, now, disease, right, because of the time that we're living in. And they're looking at things like climate change. They're thinking about living with the consequences of that. And they're thinking about the types of jobs that they're going to go into. And when we compare that, and unfortunately these kind of statistics, you can't directly compare them because they were counted at very different times. And it's, of course, if you ask a baby boomer now who was born in 1948, what they're worried about is going to be completely different to what a 20-year-old is worried about, of course. But if you can see in Gen X and baby boomers, this is from a few years earlier from the same piece of research from Deloitte, you can actually see that what people are worried about there are pretty much personal, individual concerns. I'm worried about the type of world I'm going to retire into. I'm worried about my retirement. I'm worried about my health. I'm worried about healthcare for me. I'm worried about my debt. You compare that with what Gen Z and millennials are looking at, it's very, very different. That's how much society has changed. This has direct repercussion for football. Football's not immune to this, like I said. This is a piece of research from the ECA, and what I think is interesting about this is the numbers of people who have been interested in football before, over 13 years old, but are no longer interested in the game, and the reasons why. If you look at the top 2, they're essentially about preferences, saying, I'd rather do something else. But the bottom 5, they're all about values. They're all saying, the game let me down. The game, I don't align with what this game stands for anymore. And I think that's a wake-up call. If I'm not convincing you, no idea if I am or not, I'm only looking at myself in the mirror, I have to be honest. If I'm not convincing you, I want to do something with you called a history of the future, which is something that I'm super interested in now. I'm going to read you a couple of examples. Let's imagine that we're in 2051. Let's imagine we're in a classroom, okay? Imagine we're in 2051. We are students reading about the English Academy system and how that system incorporated thousands of young people each year, each of which had a tiny percentage chance to make it to play a single game of professional football. Less than 1% chance. An entire industry of 1.5 million aspirations and 3,000 academy players' dreams devoted to the achievement of just 25. Does that historian that we're reading about write about the amazing community work of club community organisations? Or does she say it produced a colossal amount of wastage of human potential based upon the false idea that talented young people from 9 years old upwards are told they will make it, when in fact most are collateral damage for the less than 1% who will? And then maybe we go on to compare the NCAA model or a different type of academy model which we know exists. NCAA model is the American model. of college tuition alongside elite performance development, if you don't know. Let's then imagine in 2051, we're listening to a climatologist, and she reflects on the collapsing ecosystem and looks at our sport and our stadiums back in 2021. She looks at the gigantic carbon footprint of our sport, where just 1 in 10 of the stadia in the 2016 Euros had renewable energy, and 38%, only 38% of the waste produced was recycled. Imagine we read about that 30 years in the future when our children's children are living with the consequences of climate change. Are they going to say, they did really good employability programs? They did some amazing recycling awareness work with our communities. Or are they going to ask why that lens was not turned in on the internal business practice of the sport itself and its stadiums? Okay, this is where it gets a bit crazy. Maybe you think it got crazy already. This is a bit about technology, and this is the second driver of change that I think is going to affect football and potentially transform our sport. And again, just a reminder, what I'm hoping is to recruit you in building a vision of a different type of football. All right, so when we look at tech, we're actually, again, talking about societal attitudes and changes. And the reason why that technology is successful now is because it combines with those societal attitudes and changes. The big driver here is economic pessimism. Young people have basically been locked out of a financial system, right? They can't access it in the same way. And as a result, they don't trust it anymore. There's a very long story that I think we've run out of time for, but there's a kind of long story about the last 70 years, which is about initial optimism. Actually, let me do it this way. Who knows what the luckiest year to have been born was in recorded history? Do you want to have a stab? Who wants to have a go? Right, it was 1948. If you're born in 1948, that's the luckiest year to have been born in recorded history. And just think about that for a second and the way that we sell ourselves this idea that we're on this long chain of progress. The truth is that right now, if you're 30 years old and you're in Europe or America, you're the poorest 30-year-old for 70 years. If you're a millennial now, you were the first peacetime generation in recorded history that will be poorer than their parents, financially so. Young people have lost trust in that system. And so what they did back in the 2010s is the smartest among them, they built an alternative, and they built that on blockchains.
It's interesting for you to say that you were lucky when you were born in 1948. Probably it excludes people born in Czechoslovakia in 1948.
Possibly. And I did say, excuse me, but I did say in the US and Western Europe.
Yeah, it's very good to make sure that...
Sure. And I'm talking, you'll have to excuse me as well, because I don't want to chuck everyone in the same bucket here, but I'm talking about financially as well in Western Europe and US. But I appreciate your contribution, and thank you very much for correcting that not everybody's experience is exactly the same. Thank you. No, you're welcome. So, where were we? Yeah, so they built this alternative on blockchain technology. So, who's into blockchain here? Anyone into it at all? Anyone thinks they understand it? Hands up if you understand it. Great, fantastic, awesome. Some people are laughing. Hands up if you've got a crypto wallet. Okay, keep your hands up. Just put your hands right up for a second if you've got a crypto wallet. Can everyone just look around the room and see who's got their hand up? Okay, what I want you to know is to understand how important blockchain technology and how rapid this situation is going to change is right now, as things stand, the adoption of blockchain technology is happening at twice the rate that the adoption of the internet was happening in the late 1990s. It's happening at twice the rate. What that probably means is when we come back next year to EFDN, we'll see twice as many hands grow up, and when we come back in 4 years' time, the room will be full. So even though none of us really understand it right now, it's going very, very fast. And what that blockchain technology does is it achieves two things that young people want. First of all, it increases their chances of increasing their own personal wealth. That is, they can take back a piece of the pie that they feel they lost to the old financial system. And the second thing it does is it's, excuse the language, but it's a fuck you. It's a fuck you to the old financial system that they feel locked out of and that they feel was too opaque. The system that in 2007, 2008 crashed and then essentially guaranteed that the jobs that they were promised after they completed their university education wouldn't be there. So that's the reason why these technologies, without going too much to what their functionality is, that's the reason why these technologies are really, really accelerating. And that has a massive direct impact upon us. And the reason why it has a big impact upon us is because there are new types of organization that are coming with that.
Do you think that the banks or the big banks will ever allow for a decentralized finance system?
Maybe, but let's take that, because decentralized, you've asked a good question at a good moment. Let's just leap straight into the word decentralized. But it's a very interesting question you ask. So decentralized is the word, basically, of blockchain. And this type of organization that I want to show you here is called a DAO. It stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a new way of doing community organizations. And to be honest, it's a new way of building any type of organization. Noun DAO is probably the most famous of them. And what they do is they've got a treasury, they've got a pot, a charitable foundation, and they distribute that money to projects that do charitable or advance the aims of technology to anyone. Every day, they create one of these little characters and they put it for sale on the Ethereum blockchain, and every day it sells for more than $250,000. You can go on there now and see what the running total is, the auction is today. Now, these DAOs, they're spreading. There are hundreds of them. There's even two that are about the creation of new football clubs. There's one that is claiming they're going to buy a championship football club in England by running a DAO and running it in a completely decentralized way. In the city of Reno, in Nevada, the mayor is considering issuing every single citizen of Reno with a token. And that token then means an NFT. It means that those citizens can participate in the governance of that city. Now just think about that a minute for football and our types, and football for community organizations, and how transformational that could be. Totally decentralized, totally stakeholder owned. And the reason why this is really, really important is because very soon, the possibility for a new type of football in a new space is going to be there. For those of you that followed the Facebook announcement, metaverses are coming. And when metaverses come, and it won't just be the Facebook one, there are others that are also being built at the same time, decentralized versions of that. When that comes, football's going to be played there. And the people that are going to be playing it are exactly the young people that we talked about earlier. And they're going to have this opportunity. The opportunity they're going to have is they're going to be able to build the football that they want to build from day one. Now think about that. If you could build a new football and you could start tomorrow, would you keep everything the same? Would it be the same football now? I'm guessing there's quite a lot you would change. They're going to get that opportunity. And the fact of the matter is they don't need us for it. So, now that we've gone through all of this and we've looked at my kind of like reasons for why I think society is massively going to change, and the reason why I'm asking you as very, very purposeful individuals, perhaps to kind of like look and begin to ask questions of your clubs, your organizations, your federations, your institutions, to try to get you guys to actually join that vision of building a different type of football now that those young people may want to be part of, and not just in the metaverse. That is what I think is super important. And I think I've run out of time, but I have a set of questions that you can actually take back. And they're destigmatized questions. They're questions without blame. They're not pointing fingers at anyone, because no one is to blame. We've built what we've built. We've got what we've got. Now this is about changing football and improving football for the future. And I've got a set of questions that if you're interested, you can come up to me after the talk and you can ask me, and I can tell you how I think you can take these conversations back to your club. But I would say instead that, and somehow the book cover has gone out of there, but I would ask you to join genuinely, in the meantime, just join genuinely transformational movements in the game. I think common goal is a genuinely transformational movement, right? And it answers that Premier League statistic there with 1%, not 0.01%. The other thing is there is a book coming out in January called Radical Football. And in that book, there's a couple of essays at the end. One is by my colleague, Khalida Papau, and one of them is by my boss, Dr. Pippa Grange. And they propose to, both of these people work within football clubs themselves, but they propose totally radical and totally different versions of what football can be. And I think to kind of leave you with a question that I think about all the time is, when we think about what we want football to be, are we thinking big enough? Thank you very much for your time today.